So thank you everyone for coming. Before we start, I want to say that we respectfully acknowledge that the land in which we are currently occupying, myself and Ashley, as well as many other people here, is the unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and that the island of Newfoundland is the homelands of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Natsivut and Ninatukovut, and the Innu of Nitassinan as the original people of Labrador. A lot of Ashley's work over this project and during her time at grad school has been based in Windsor, Ontario. So we'd also like to acknowledge that Windsor sits on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi people. This acknowledgement is a commitment in practice and in action. So we're always striving for respectful relationships with all people of Turtle Island. So it's important to be acknowledging not only the space that we're physically sitting in, but the spaces that we inhabit as we work. I'm also going to read Ashley's bio, just in case somebody here doesn't know who Ashley is. I'm going to read a little bit of information on her. Ashley Hemmings is a visual artist and gallery worker from Newfoundland and Labrador. She's currently based in Windsor, Ontario, where she is working towards her MFA at the University of Windsor. Ashley completed her BFA in visual art from the Grenfell campus, Memorial University of Newfoundland. Her research-based art practice has led her to partner with environmental scientists, cognitive psychologists, and horticulturalists to consider the intersection of many different ways of looking at and interacting with the natural world. Most recently, Ashley has shown her solo project souvenir documents at the Rogue Gallery in St. John's. Ashley has also worked in a number of art galleries across Newfoundland, including Eastern Edge Gallery, the Grenfell Art Gallery, and the Rooms Provincial Art Gallery. Currently, she works as a research assistant to Dr. Jennifer Willett and Incubator Art Lab at the University of Windsor. So thank you very much, Ashley, for being here. I'm just gonna let you take it away. So if people can hide their videos, make sure your cameras or your audio is turned off. I'll let Ashley take it away.
Thank you. I want to thank Daniel for the introduction and the land acknowledgement. And I just want to thank all of you guys for coming. And Eastern Edge for having me as the artist in residence. Okay, so I would like to start by saying that I have felt and continue to feel conflicted about having this artist residency at this time. I applied for this residency months ago, before the pandemic and before the global protests, and it has been hard to feel like I should be making or sharing my artwork when there are other people who could benefit from having the platform that I've been given. So before I start talking about my residency, I just want to make sure that I take this time to say donate money, donate to our local Black Lives Matter group, donate to the Association for New Canadians, donate to local Indigenous groups and charities like First Light Friendship Center, donate to the bail funds in Toronto or in the US so that the protesters doing this vital work are not being taken off the streets. Just because things have quieted down a lot in the media, it doesn't mean that the fight is over. If you can't donate money, consider what other resources you do have that you can offer. Give people rides, make people dinner, use your online platform to share information and resources. It is so important always, but especially right now, for us to consider our positions of privilege and to find ways to challenge and break down these systems that value certain voices and certain lives above others. So I'm going to talk about my residency now. I sort of have it broken into 3 different parts. I'm going to start by talking about the rug hooking. Then I'm going to talk about the community engagement that I've done as a part of this residency. And then I'm going to end by talking about protest posters and a little bit more about Black Lives Matter. The first bit of text that I have is taken directly from an artist statement that I had to write at my MFA. And then I sort of talk a bit more casually about some of the work individually. Growing up in Newfoundland, my life and personal identity has always been rooted in the land and my sense of place. Being raised in a community that emphasizes the homemade, homegrown, and the necessity of sharing resources with neighbors has led me to question contemporary art practices that can so heavily rely upon capitalist and colonialist traditions of consumption. Having recently relocated to Windsor, Ontario to attend graduate school, I was surprised to see the multitude of signs telling me how to behave here when outdoors. Do not feed the birds, respect the fish, do not throw stones. These signs reminded me of my grandmother. and the catchy phrases that she recites almost unconsciously as remnants of her past growing up on Nova Scotia farmland. She says, "If it doesn't kill the cows, who cares?" She says, "You tell him, Cabbage, you've got the head." She says, "Wear out the old horse first." I started to compare both of these instances of language, the rural and the urban, and the ways that these forms of language describe and dictate our interactions between humans and their natural environments. The municipal signs act as regulators, while my grandmother's phrases are descriptors that are quirky but also kind of cryptic. I decided to start hooking rugs with these texts on them, both the words from the signs and from my grandmother. I was interested in displaying both forms of language on the same hierarchical level and in exploring how the meanings of the texts changed when presented through a craft medium as opposed to an authoritative government sign. I chose rug hooking because of its importance as a traditional Newfoundland craft of poverty and form of women's work. Working in this way allows me to celebrate the matriarchal lineage of knowledge emphasized in Newfoundland craft histories, giving value to ways of making that are typically passed down through the women in families and are often considered less valid than other more academic ways of knowing and learning. So I started to make these rugs. I've been clicking through the images, but I'm just going to go back and talk about them individually for a minute. So this is the first one that I did. It says, "If it doesn't kill the cows, who cares?" This is a phrase that my nan says. It's kind of said in a way that means if the cows didn't die, then it couldn't have been that big of a deal, whatever it was. I think it's probably never been said in reference to actual cows, but I like to think of it as a kind of environmental statement. Like, if the cows are fine, we're all fine, except now the cows are not fine and the planet's not fine, so maybe we should care. The next two, "Keep out of pond" and "No person or pets allowed in water," are both signs from the same tiny pond at a park in Windsor, Ontario. There are actually 4 of these signs around the pond, 2 of each of the ones that I made. And if you look at the first photo, you can see basically the entirety of the pond there. So it was kind of absurd to me how many signs they needed to regulate such a small body of water. "Play here" is a sign that I found in Windsor on an abandoned concrete building. It was clearly an old convenience store, and the sign seemed to be like an ad for scratch tickets, but part of it was broken off, so all that was left were the words "Play here." I liked the idea of the abandoned building asking you to play inside of it, to reclaim the space with play. "Please do not touch the hedges" is a sign from inside the Detroit Institute of Art. When I go to galleries, I always look for directional signs, the signs that say, "Please do not touch the art gently, no photography," etc. So I was very excited to find this one at the DIA by the gallery's restaurant, telling customers not to touch the hedges. And I don't actually remember, but I'm pretty sure they were artificial hedges. This is the most recent rug that I finished. It's based on a sign from the East Coast Trail, specifically located in between Signal Hill and Kitty Vitty, leading up to a point called the Ladies Lookout. It's a social distancing sign that's been put up since the start of COVID, but the use of 2 different kinds of stick people make it look more like a gender segregation sign, and I thought that was really strange and funny. So at first, the rugs were very much text-based, but then I started to think about signs that don't have text and how I can emphasize or change the imagery slightly to influence the message of the sign. This one, for example, was a "Do not pick the flowers" sign from Peely Point, a provincial park in Ontario. I took the original black and white motif of the sign and made it more colorful, added some extra flowers, and I was really excited by what started to happen when the rugs were getting more campy and kitschy. So then with this rug, I really wanted to push that kitsch factor. So I took this phrase from my nan, "Wear out the old horse first," and tried to actually shape the rug like a horse. For me, this kind of pushed the boundary between sign and not sign a little further. And it reminded me of the wooden 2D cutouts that a lot of people here and around the Bay put up on their front lawns to make these strange little dioramas. So this is an image of one, for example, that I passed when walking the old railroad tracks up behind my parents' house in Topsail. I'm newly excited by the potential of including these kinds of folk art aesthetics into my research moving forward. So now I'm going to talk about the community engagement part of my residency. When I started this project in Windsor, I was very much focused on my personal experiences and those of my direct family. As a part of the residency, I wanted to open the conversation further. Since the pandemic prevented any kind of in-person gathering, I worked with Eastern Edge to come up with a few online events to promote community engagement. The first thing that I did was an Instagram takeover. So I shared some information about myself and the project, and then I asked people to share with me images of strange signs they have come across and or quirky phrases that have been passed down to them through their families. I said that I was specifically interested in texts that relate to the land or to animals, but I was happy to receive any kind of input. So these were some of the family phrases that were submitted to me. I can just leave this here for a second for you guys to read, but my favorite is wound up tighter than a horse's snatch. I also had people submit a number of municipal signs. Some of these are from Windsor, there's a few from Montreal, one from Alberta, one from the Ghouls here in St. John's. And I really like the one down in the bottom left. Bikers yield to pedestrians and both yield to horses. I thought that one was funny. And then these are some hand-drawn community-made signs that were submitted to me. I really like the one on the left that was clearly made and installed by a child. I think children doing activism work is like the most hopeful and optimistic and also the most wholesome thing ever. From the submissions, I chose this one submitted to me by Matthew Hollett to make into a rug. I want to do more work with the other submissions, but this was all that I've had time for so far. I think I picked this one because it's kind of abstract. Like, I guess it means don't feed the birds, but it could mean something else. And I like Matthew's interpretation. Oops. He always imagines this means no waving at the birds. So for my next attempt at virtual engagement, I recorded a rug hooking tutorial video to be uploaded to the gallery's website. I really enjoy hosting workshops and teaching, so it was important to me, since I couldn't host an in-person event, to be able to create this teaching tool so that anyone who was interested in learning about rug hooking could follow along at home. I think it's pretty awkward and cringy to watch. I say so and like a million times, but I'm probably doing that right now too. But I think making it was a good exercise, especially in these like strange social distance times. When I go back to school in the fall, I'm gonna have to be a teaching assistant, and that's gonna be by distance, so I might have to do this kind of stuff. The following week after we published that video, I hosted a Maker's Afternoon with EE on Zoom, where anyone who wanted to could join in and work on their own art projects independently but together. And I was also available to answer any rug hooking questions that people might have after viewing the video. It was really nice to work alongside other artists again after having spent so much time working just like sitting on the floor in my parents' bedroom watching Netflix. We talked technique, a few of us were rug hooking, and it was good to just like gossip about art again, because I'd been missing that sense of community. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about pretty briefly is the idea of hooked rugs as protest posters and textile art as political action. So a few months back in a class crit, one of the other MFAs in my program said that the way my rugs were made, the vertical rectangular format with the almost sloppy, quick written text reminded him of a protest poster. This idea really stuck with me. I liked the idea of the rugs and the strange words on them as a kind of abstract environmental protest. Then, after the murder of George Floyd, when the protests against police violence started, I wanted to join in somehow. So I sketched out this quick design onto some burlap and I started hooking the rug. I was thinking a lot about what kind of art needs to be made right now. Thinking about emotional and physical labor, thinking about slow, intentional actions, thinking about textiles as objects of care, thinking about ways of protesting, and thinking about change. Textiles are and have always been political. Historically, quilts were used as maps to help Black slaves reach freedom. Elaborate tapestries have been made to tell counterculture narratives. Craft artists use the domesticity of textiles to make feminist statements, and slow, handmade craft work has been used to question the dominant narratives of capitalism and consumerism. I see a protest poster as being something that is potentially quickly drawn, but absolutely full of emotion and deep with symbolic labor. The poster as an object represents huge amounts of time and energy that goes into the protesting and the daily actions towards a cause. In a way, I feel that rug hooking a poster makes the labor visible because it is obvious that every loop and every stitch takes time. The time that I spent hooking this rug was time that I spent listening to podcasts with Black hosts, watching documentaries about Black lives, and meeting virtually with other artists to talk about the importance of making art spaces more accessible to minority communities. Considering the rugs as protest posters is something that I'm still kind of newly thinking about, and maybe I don't have a lot more to say about yet. But I've been thinking a lot about it, and I've been thinking a lot about labor. So I just want to read a quote. In the article, Labor Made Visible by Holly Amber Kennedy, she asks the question, how can you make visible what you have been trained not to see? She says, often labor is not only invisible, but unimaginable. It is vital to undertake research, to consider where we see which kinds of labor, what happens at the center of the city, and what occurs at the periphery. I read that article in the context of the MIT Press Documents of Contemporary Art Anthology on Craft. In it, she's talking about the labor of underpaid textile workers making things by hand. But I think the phrase can equally be applied to considerations of emotional labor and the daily labor of minorities that people with privilege are trained not to see. So this is where I am now. That's what I'm thinking about moving forward. I haven't started any new rugs in the past week or two, and I think it's time that I'm going to just do some thinking and some research before moving forward. Moving into the question period, I love book recommendations. If you have anything that you think I need to read, I'd love to hear about it, and I'm happy to answer just any questions you might have. And otherwise, I would just like to say thank you so much to Eastern Edge for having me, and thank you for everyone who sat here and listened to me talk. I'm sorry if I went very quickly. Donate money if you can, stay safe, wear a mask when you're in public, and take care of yourself. I'm gonna turn my video back on now, and we can have a chat.
That was a great talk, Ashley. Really was. Great. And I'm so interested in what you're doing and where you're taking your ideas. It's really, really good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Seriously. How much longer are you going to be in St. John's? Do you know?
So my plan was to go back to Windsor in September, but it seems like they're not going to be letting us back in the building at all. At first, they thought they'd let us in our studios, but if they're not going to be letting us in our studios and all of our classes are going to be online, I might be in St. John's for a little bit longer. Right. So it's really up in the air right now. My hope is that I will get back to Windsor at some point in the fall, but I think for now, I'm just going to stay here until things clear up because it's really bad over there right now.
Working at Eastern Edge, you've got things there that you're working on.
I'm currently in Eastern Edge Studios.
Do you know how long you'll be there?
Until they kick me out.
Okay. All right, so I'll probably drop by.
That would be amazing. I'm not here every day, but you could let me know a day that you can come by. I would love to meet with you.
I have my mask.
I'll wear one too.
Hey. That was awesome. I was like laughing my butt off over here. The signs are hilarious. And then I love your rugs, and I love how they've been changed into that format. Like the hard kind of corporate edges are totally dissolved. I just, yeah, I love what you're doing so much. And I really appreciated what you were saying about just kind of the challenges of making work right now, and really taking that hard look at, what do we make right now? How do we respond to what's happening? And that really resonated with me. And it's really nice to hear you say that and to relate to it so much. An artist someone I've recently learned about, and maybe you've already aware of her work, but there's been more and more conversation about the relationship to racism and kind of like climate change and racism, and how the fight for climate change. Climate change is about human rights. And I think an author who I've been following, I always mess up her name, I'm trying to log into my phone right now, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who's a marine biologist and has been writing about this lately throughout increasingly since the murder of George Floyd, and has just, I think she's been writing a lot of articles about this that are more mainstream, and like Washington Post. And so anyway, just someone to look up. And I think that like your work is so rooted in environmental justice too, and disrupting colonial ideas of how we control the natural environment. And so I think the work you're doing is really important. I just wanted to say that. But so not really a question exactly, but just I love the conversation you're starting with all your work.
Thank you. And thank you for the recommendation to look up.
Yeah. So you said that I liked how you kind of answered this question of usually what's going to happen next, where will you go with this project next. I'm just wondering what's on your reading list coming up, or like what kind of research directions are you planning on taking?
I actually went into the Eastern Edge David Tuck Memorial Library and grabbed a nice little pile of books. So like another MIT Press Documents of Contemporary Art book. I have the Everyday I've been reading, and tabbed a bunch of stuff. I also grabbed The Poetics of Space. I have a Marlene Kreitz exhibition catalog. And I have Radical Gestures, Feminism, and Performance Art in North America. So that's my current reading pile.
Were those all from the library?
Yeah, there's some good stuff in the library.
Nice.
Do you have any feedback from your family or those from whom you've inherited this rug hook tradition about how you use it now? Ooh, that's a good question, Michael. My nan, she didn't say this to me, but she said it to my mom one time. She was like, Ashley must love me an awful lot. She's always making art about me. And that really like warmed my whole heart because she's like one of my favorite people and she means so much to me. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. My mom sometimes gets it and sometimes doesn't. Like she loves this rug, but she was like, oh, I love it, but it'd be so much better if it like didn't have the line going through it. I'm like, yeah, but that's not the point. Yeah, but they think I'm good at the thing. Thanks for coming, Marae. I just saw her message. Yeah, so my mom thinks like I'm good at rug hooking, but she doesn't necessarily understand the signs. And then my nan just is the sweetest angel. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, Michael.
Oh, it's Tangine, it's not Steve Sharp.
Yeah, I was like, who's Steve?
That's just somebody I live with. Forgive him. I have a question. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I was following you correctly. When you were talking at the end, like now you're going to do some research, and you were talking about that with others and showing your books from the David Tuck Memorial. Mm-hmm. What type of like, am I correct in assuming that you're going to continue with rug hooking, or are you stopping? Because you said you haven't done it for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Are you stopping the process of rug hooking? I know you're talking about also using like biomaterials, or was there something else? Like, do you feel like you need to just take a breath and maybe use a new material or a different material?
My plan is to keep making rugs, but yeah, I don't know. It's just like weird and hard to feel like I should be making art right now, and maybe I feel like I should be doing some research. Like, so I sort of took the summer and just like made a bunch of rugs and pretended I wasn't doing my MFA and didn't do any of like the research academic side of things. So I think I need to maybe step back and do a little bit more of that to sort of ground the making in. And then there's also so much of like the politics going on in the world right now that I want to absorb a little more before I try to make things. But I do still plan on doing more rugs in this series, and maybe branching them out to be more directly related to like protest posters, instead of just signage. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was just curious about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're doing excellent. I love it. I especially love everything, but I love the horse, and I love picking flowers, and Black Lives Matter. I was really impressed that you did that too. So yeah, thanks for sharing your work, and I thought the presentation was great.
Thank you so much.
I have not so much a question, but something that what you've just said prompted in my brain about protest posters specifically. And excuse me, it reminded me that when I Don't Know More was taking place in St. John's, Janelle Duval, who's a local musician you probably know, was leading a drum circle in the Avalon Mall, and we got kicked out of the mall. We had to stand outside in the rain, and a lot of our protest posters were rained on, but it made them really beautiful because the silly shitty ink was just like streaming down the paper, and we were like, oh well, this is about water, and isn't this amazing, and then more recently there was a number of people from the Anti-Racism Coalition down on Water Street, across the street from some Yellow Vest agitators or whatever, and it was a really windy day, and actually we did the posters up in St. Michael's Gallery before the event, and the wind pulled one of the posters out of our hands, and it actually got run over by a car. And there was this huge tire stripe across the anti-racist poster, and it was like "Stop Racism," and there was like a tire. And I was just thinking about how, posters are just, there's something you make really often very quickly in advance, and you worry a lot about whether what you're saying is going to translate well. And and then I remember feeling personal agony about some of the slogans that we'd chosen. Like, we had one that said, "Everyone is welcome here." And then I thought, well, who's welcoming whom? Like, why did we say that? And so, I don't know, it's just like the 3 or 4 words that you get to put on an expansive.
Yeah. And like the specific language that you're choosing.
Yeah, and there was this, a senior who's a friend of mine showed up at the protest outside the prison when Beatrice Hunter was in jail. And she'd created this amazing poster that was in a shoebox that she just had under her arm. And she like walked up to us, and then she just pulled it in, and it was cut so that it flipped open. And I just remember thinking it was like the savviest, smartest poster, right? Because it looked like she was just carrying a little shoebox, like, boom.
Next level spy protesting.
Yeah, and this time when we had the Black Lives Matter event, like I don't know if it's because I'm in my late 40s, but the posters I want to make these days are just bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're usually on like huge collapsed box from a fridge or something. And but the bigger they are in Newfoundland, the harder they are, because the wind always gets at them, and then you're like blowing all over the place, so the size becomes like sort of a stupid thing. Anyway, just random thoughts.
No, that's great. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like displaying the rugs and how to display them like in a gallery or not a gallery. And I've been thinking more about the idea of like getting them some kind of like cardboard or wooden back structure so they can hold their own, and then like putting them on stakes and sticking them in the ground. And like if it'd be better to just like put them all outside somewhere than put them in the gallery. And like, yeah, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on displaying them, because I just sort of stuck them up here so I could see them while I was working, but I really don't like the way they look just tacked to the wall.
We do have that green space next to.
Oh yeah, the little park. Interesting.
And it would probably bring a lot of attention in a really cool way.
Yeah, and then like the rugs themselves would like get wear from being out in the weather.
Yeah.
I forgot about the green space.
Yeah, and I think if you have them outside, I like the idea of it having wear from the weather, and kind of like what Jen was saying, like about the signs getting, I guess, watered down. It's kind of deflated, and like see what happens when they're like that, how it changes.
Yeah, and even like rugs, they're so soft and plush when you first get them, and then after you walk on them for so long, they get like flattened down into your footsteps. So it's kind of like they're plush, and then the more that they're out in the weather, they get like flattened down. I'm into that.
And like the signs that are put up around ponds now for the COVID, like to encourage people to walk a certain way around. And like my partner and I go on walks for our mental health almost every day. And a lot of these, they're getting torn down. People are really angry, and I've been throwing them in ponds, and we've been like waddling, you know, down to get them and like hauling them back up. And I even got to the point where I was bringing a marker because people were always pulling the paper copy of the sign down, and I just put a huge arrow with my marker on the, you know, so.
You're so good. And even like Kitty Vitty, yeah, they just have like wooden signs and then like paper instructions stapled to them, so when it rains all the ink runs. Like what are they doing?
Can I ask a side question?
Yeah.
Do they have they replaced the little Toulouse goose? Are there any new Toulouse goose queenies or saucy mics in the pond? Or it's gone?
Oh, the goose?
Yeah, I know that he or she died.
Yeah, the goose died.
But they said originally there was a different goose, and that the one that you met or I met, was a replacement. Somebody dropped one off. Is that just myth? Tell me Newfoundland stories.
I have no idea. I don't know if anyone else knows. There was like this huge, lovely goose at Kitty Vitty that would like come eat out of your hand, but would also maybe attack you if it didn't like you. But it died this past winter. I don't think they have a new one. I haven't seen anything, but I would love it if they got one. But I never heard about someone just dropping a new one off of the pond.
I only asked because, every time I brought up the goose, because I just moved here last June, right? And every time I brought up the goose, everyone had a different story to tell me. Oh, I'll tell you this story. And I loved it. That's it. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Tangine.
Hey, I'm thinking about your rugs again and display, and I also love how soft they are, because the other signs are so rigid and formal, even though they're sort of absurd. But I love the kind of floppiness of the rug. It's like, there's something kind of charming about that too, that kind of pokes at those absurd rules. The photos of the pond, that pond is hilarious. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. That little tiny pond with all those signs.
It's a man-made pond, and there's like an electricity box next to it that it's like plugged into to run the motor for it, but they don't lock the cage that's over the power box, so you can go sit by it and like charge your phone.
That's so crazy.
That's my like Windsor secret, is if I need to charge my phone out for a walk, I'll just go sit by this pond.
That's awesome. It's so weird, like, and it's also so strange kind of going to those sites, like these tiny constructed sites, to get that feeling of like, to feel like you're in nature, like when you're in the city. Anyway, it's neat, like what the little pockets that you go to in an urban environment to kind of like recharge, but then it's this tiny like constructed environment with electricity running through it and like filled with signage. Like it's kind of interesting, but yeah.
It's also like directly across the river from Detroit, so you're sitting next to it just looking at Detroit.
Well, yeah.
And back to the rug display, like do you have any ideas as to how I could display them so they like stand up on their own but still are floppy?
Like what if they were just like the rugs but still on spikes, not spikes, but like stakes into the ground, but not like flap over. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if that would work or not, but just another thing to throw into the mix. But there's something, it's like they're not function, but then I guess it all depends on like then they wouldn't function the same way, because they wouldn't be as visible. So that could change the meaning. I don't know if that
but maybe
would
like
work or not.
some are really structured and then some are more floppy.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Like pillows, like stuffed, or I don't know. It's so interesting, like this resurgence of rug hooking and contemporary art practices for installation, and it's so exciting, like seeing all the different ways to present it and strategize. And
I love all the stuff that Larry's been doing.
Yeah,
like oh,
amazing.
So
Totally. Yeah,
dimensional rugs with stuff on like all sides of it.
Oh yeah, Larry'd be a good person to check in with and
that's a good
chat about this too. Yeah. Anyway, fun. I'm hogging the chat. I'm gonna unmute, or I'm going to mute.
I was just gonna add that I think maybe chicken wire would be great, because you could kind of put it on the back and then form the chicken wire. So you're creating the illusion of softness or of like fragility in a lot of ways. And you could just easily attach it by like loop, like, you know, like just like loop through. I'm also not going to take up a whole bunch of your time because we talk like 5 days a week. So I'm just going to leave that.
That's a good idea though, because I could like give it the structure, but still let it like be a little more floppier than if it was just on a wooden board. That's good.
You could also like perform them, like have the sticks on different, like floppy that tap to different parts where people hold and move it in that type of way. So you have the floppiness, but if you really like some points, it can be like that strong piece as well.
Yeah, I like when I first started this project, I was thinking that the end idea, I didn't even talk about this in the presentation, but I was going to hook the rugs and then bring them back to the locations that they described and photograph like myself holding them there, or I would bring them to different locations and photograph them. Yeah, but then I wasn't sure how I felt about like a photograph being the thing that came out of it. So that was just something that I totally didn't talk about. But yeah, I like the idea of them being performed somehow.
This is all being recorded. I'll stop the recording in a moment, but again, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Ashley, for the work you've been doing, for just the very considered work that you've been doing, and for taking time to share that with all of us right now. We very much appreciate it. So thank you. Round of applause.
I really appreciate everybody coming. You're all the best.